Thank you. Calling the Finance Committee meeting of 6 January to order. Happy New Year, everyone. First order on the agenda is approval. Well, first of all members, Alderman Payon, Alderwoman Finlayson are present and accounted for. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. We have two pieces of legislation that are currently showing on the agenda that I would suggest both were addressed at Rules Committee yesterday, and both the committee recommended postponement of both of those to get further information and refinement. We can either leave it on the agenda and officially postpone it, or we can remove those two things from the agenda.
I'd move that we remove them. I don't see the relevance of my legislation to anything we do on the Finance Committee.
Okay.
And
thanks.
Are you suggesting that they not come back to the Finance Committee at all, or just postponing action on them?
I don't see why that would even be on the agenda to begin with.
That's fine with me. Takia's going to set us on the right track, however.
It was referred at the city council meeting. I believe Alderman Arnett asked for
it. So you can blame me, but if you want to put it on the agenda and then ask for it to not continue to be referred, we can do that. However, the committee.
Let's just postpone it for today then.
All right.
I mean, pull it from the agenda. Yeah, there are some slight financial implications, but it's not a lot.
All right. So is there a motion to approve the agenda with the removal of the two legislative items?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the agenda as amended signify by saying aye. Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.
Almost. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of the transmission that we received from the Financial Advisory Commission with regard to the spending feasibility analysis that they had done to date, and the relevant portion of that letter is found in the third full paragraph, where the fact says, then the fact would welcome a referral back to the commission with appropriate authorization to continue working on this concept. The letter came to the mayor and the city council. I certainly read it when we got it, and I was one of the instigators for this, but apparently no one has given a referral back. I don't know that we've ever really done this before, and I would certainly welcome help from the city attorney or the city manager. But for me, and we can have discussion on this, I most certainly want them to continue to explore this model. It's used by both the state and the county to look at financial feasibility, mainly burden on the taxpayers for expenditures by the governmental jurisdiction.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yes, City Manager Gerald.
Yeah, thank you. And as we discussed during the FAC meeting when this was presented to us, we're certainly supportive of this. We haven't responded because we wanted to get a sense of the council about support for this or not. And I'll just mention that at the work session, council work session next week, Bob Burton's going to do a presentation on this as well for the full council, so they'll get the flavor of what the FAC's looking at for this, and maybe we want to wait until after that to get a sense of the council. We're happy to respond, but we just wanted to check in first with the council.
I guess I'm feeling a little more proactive than that, but let me see what the committee members think. I just would like to get them. I don't know what the mechanism is to refer back to them, and I don't know what an appropriate authorization is. It seems to me they're authorized to do analysis of anything that is financial advisory. But if they're looking for something from us, and I think that's the thrust of this letter, I just as soon give them a positive response sooner rather than later. But I leave that to the wisdom of you, Mr. Gerald, and the committee members.
May I ask, they're proposing that they do a spending affordability analysis for us. Is that correct?
No. They're proposing to continue to explore how the county and the state do their spending affordability model. One of the subsets of that, it's something that I asked for at the FAC meeting, was can we just extend the analysis that is done at the county level to the city level? And not all data are available at the city level that are available at the county level. I don't think the FAC themselves could do that analysis. They would have to have some help. I had also suggested at that same meeting that we have a meeting of both the FAC people or the subcommittee and Eric Lashinsky from Planning and Zoning, who is looking at the fiscal impact model that Mary Burkholder is putting together for us, which has a lot of the same ESRI data underpinnings and Census Bureau data underpinnings that the state model has. And it seemed to me, and we'll hear this, I assume, at the work session next week, that there's a possibility of having a synergy between two separate efforts, and that it would be a model that could help us better understand our finances. We just don't know. But I think that the fact themselves, I don't have the sense, and I would look to Jody or David, that they're thinking that they can do anything other than tell us about the state and county model, and suggest that there's more work that could be done. But that's my impression. David and Jody were both at that meeting. I'd like to hear what they think.
Yeah, I guess I thought that they were going to take it a little bit further, not do a full-blown spending affordability study for the city, but maybe use the information that's in the state and county and maybe customize it more for the city, or extrapolate some of the information out of it that's particularly applicable for the city. I thought they were going to take it a little bit further. That was
that is my understanding as well.
Okay, well, that's great.
We're going to first look to the county and state and see what kind of information they're using, see how it can be applied to us, and then decide if they can just use what the county does, or if they want to analyze a little bit closer and give us recommendations on spending affordability for the city.
Okay.
Well, I was reading the letter that Fred Sussman sent us, and that was kind of my interpretation of it. But if he's coming before us next week if he's coming before us for our work session, I don't know why we wouldn't wait and hear from him and then have an opportunity to ask questions if we're not clear on what his intent is at that time. So I would prefer that we wait and let Fred have an opportunity, Mr. Sussman, have an opportunity to explain exactly what it is they want to do for us.
Okay. Our Fred seems to be offline, but...
no, I'm here.
Okay. So, fine. I think we've taken care of that item on the agenda, and we're ready to move to the update from the finance director.
Well, we've been working on the CARES report. I'm finishing that up right now. We'll be distributing that hopefully today. I'm trying to get it to reconcile, and that's always an adventure.
What report?
CARES funding,
CARES.
An update of the CARES funding, and I've updated it to December 31st. So I've had to update my data, and then I have to drop it into our program categories. And then I have a county report I'm doing this week as well. And as you know, over the break, I sent the council an updated projection for FY 21 and 22. I believe I sent that out. What it shows us is with the updated spending information and some other savings that we found for this year, I think we've got the 21 issue resolved. And that's also assisted by the CARES money that we have received and are able to use for public safety salaries. And but we still have an issue for 22, which we'll be addressing in our upcoming budget discussions. But I think that with these one-time savings that we've been able to find this year, 21 is going to be okay. We found the cuts on the expense side.
Okay.
May I ask Jody a question? Or I'm not sure whether this is to Jody or David, but I understand that the CARES funding, the use of the CARES funding has been extended beyond the original December 30th date.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
We've been extended by 1 year. I'm not sure if the 1 year extension is to the 30th of December or the 31st of December. But yeah, so we are planning to try, if we can, to carry some of that CARES funding over into 22 to help us there. But I project that it won't be more than $200,000 or $300,000. So it's not going to address that much of the 22 issue, but it will help.
Mm-hmm. Well, it will help with us helping the community also.
It also allows us to help the stuff that we had not spent. It helps us spread out those programs into the spring, and we are continuing some of those as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see Mr. Alderman Gay has his hand up.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was busy typing. Yes, Dwan.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Just a quick question. Do we plan at any point on asking the county for additional funding? I mean, just based on how things are looking and the extensions, is that a part of the plan?
So right now they're still working with the same allocation they received originally, which was, I think, $101 million. And out of that, they originally gave us the $4,250,000. They gave us an extra $550,000 recently with an amendment. So we got that amendment approved in December. And so they have sent us that additional money. So they did give us some extra, which is helping.
So in sort of informal discussions with their budget officer, it doesn't appear that they have a lot of extra money left. Yeah. So they've got it, programmed, and they have uses for it designated, and they don't have a whole lot that's undesignated at this point. That could change in the future if some of the programs don't spend as much as they anticipate. But right now, they, besides the $550,000 that they gave us towards the end of 2020, they don't have additional funds to give us at this point.
Go ahead.
With the new round of CARES funding that was approved recently, I thought there was an increase of funding to local jurisdictions. I'm not sure whether that made the final cut in the legislation.
Not in general.
Unfortunately, it didn't. Okay. So the only additional funding that we expect to get from this latest round is some additional transit money, which certainly will help. Mm-hmm. But there's not any state and local. They're still talking about an additional round of relief in the future that may include, and certainly, the elections in Georgia will have some influence on that, but there's still discussion of state and local relief in a new relief package.
And we haven't found out the additional transit money. We haven't found out any amounts that we might get in addition to what we've already gotten. So if that's all the questions about the CARES report, I'll add that we're trying desperately to get the CAFR report out. I've had to set that aside while I work on these CARES issues and these budget issues. And that we've extended the submission of the CAFR to February 28th. for the state and for our GFOA deadline. I think a lot of governments are having the same issue and extending their financial statement deadlines.
Well,
and our auditors have also asked us, they thought they were going to have a hard time getting through the audit because they're doing a virtual audit this time around and it's taking them a bit longer. Will that affect the budget dates? The budget, no.
22 budget?
No, I used some actual numbers from the FY20 CAFR in budget preparation, but the numbers are final now. We just have to pull it together in a document form, and that's just a time requirement for me and for a little bit on my staff, for me and for the auditors. So it's just the time needed to wrap everything up. I can already produce the things that I need for the budget.
Speaking of time and resources, how are we doing on deputy finance director?
I did a round of interviews. I had 2 candidates that we did second rounds on. I just haven't made up my mind yet. And I've got a couple additional applicants that I'm going to talk to. So that's still pending.
Okay. So I think when we get to the budget, this is just me interjecting. I think staff resources, in addition to having a financing shortfall, I'm seeing 2 departments that to me really, well, 3 really. Of course, we have the perennial shortage of sworn officers, but both finance and planning and zoning seem like they've gotten a lot of additional requests. This CARES is just one of a stream of things, Jody, that have taken your time away from regular business. So I would suggest for the budget exercise, we're going to have a dual set of problems. One is a shortfall in revenue, and the other is some staffing demands that are going to really put pressure on us. I couldn't help but in Rules Committee yesterday thinking about all the things that Director Nash has on her plate. I just don't know how we're going to get it all done with fewer resources. So it's going to be a very tough budget exercise in my view. Is there anything more to the Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, thank you. On that same note, you know, we have gone round and round about having deputies in departments, and our final decision was that we would not have deputies. As Dr. Nash was speaking yesterday, I kept thinking, delegate, delegate, delegate. But if there's no one to whom to delegate, then that's a moot point. But maybe we need to talk about having a number 2 person. You know, Marcia Patrick has been the number 2 person in Public Works for as long as I can remember. Whether it's an official title or not, she's assumed those responsibilities, and when needed, she's stepped in to be acting director. Maybe we should encourage that same kind of organizing in all of our departments. And you know, I hate to put more work on already full plates, but maybe it's worth a discussion to figure out how we can do this, maybe with the staffing or with an increase in staffing, but not as significant as we might like. So that's
well, it's always easy for us to increase spending. A deputy is more than just an additional resource. A deputy is somebody that truly can be an alternate to the director. It's somebody that the director is comfortable of speaking in their stead when they're diverted to other things. You know, this, as I said, it's going to be a real dilemma for us because it's clear the pressures that are on staff really across the board. And I'm sure David could give us a lengthy treatise on issues that he's seen across the city. And yet I think City Attorney Lyles can tell us some things right now about pressures he's under. And yet we're facing less revenue, or at least a smaller increase in revenue than enough to cover current operations. So I think it's a 1-2 punch that we're going to be facing as soon as we get into the budget issues. I'm thinking back to planning and zoning and the work that Dewan is involved in with affordable housing. And actually, I'm thinking of affordable housing as another side of the short-term rental coin. In one hand, we're trying to squelch down short-term rentals. And on the other hand, we're trying to increase affordable housing. And the logic just doesn't seem to be consistent to me. But those are true things that planning and zoning are going to have to help us with. I mean, these issues are right now issues. We understand each of them and the desirability of each of them in their own right. But when you put them together, there's just not enough people to pull it off. So I think it's going to be a very tough exercise. I'm glad we started early. I'm not sure we started early enough, but maybe perhaps we can talk about this a little bit on the work session, David, for next week, because I think it's all part of the same package. Alderman
Mr.
Gay.
Chair, I would just like to warn us to not worry about semantics. Deputy is a title. You know, we don't have to call it deputy. We can call it something else that meets the need. So I don't want us to be dedicated to trying to figure out a deputy. Well,
deputy in a HR context is an alter ego. It is someone who can speak with the authority. And that's what Jody is pursuing. If Jody is just pursuing an additional high-level resource, that is a different thing. Whatever, I think that what we're hearing as we listen to departments is more and more a cry for more resources. I would be disappointed if we didn't hear that from our department heads. As a department head, I always said that. I can give you the Washington Monument if you only give me 2 more staff. So that's part of the process. But I think that there really are quantifiable additional pressures that we're under. Alderman Gay, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, excuse me, sorry. I just have 2 questions for Jody. The first is that he mentioned staff, and you only mentioned 2 departments. I consider us a department, or or so be it, or whatever. So what? And I think that we too need staff. And I also think of the compensation committee and all that. How would that work when we're facing a budget deficit? How do we take that into account? I mean, if we're considering raising salaries, just in your thought process and just what do you think of that, I guess, is my question, just from the finance director's perspective.
Are you talking to me or to Jody?
Oh, to Jody, in regards to the compensation committee and the possibility of raising salaries and stuff. What's your thought process in that?
Only that I wouldn't necessarily disagree that there are some needs. When you say increasing compensation, you mean adding positions that would be higher level positions. For every dollar you're going to add to the budget, you're going to need to take it out somewhere else. We are limited by our revenues, and we already have an issue for 22. So any increase is going to have to be compensated by an equal decrease somewhere else. So you can pursue those things if you think they're necessary, but you will have to find the savings somewhere else.
There was a presentation that you presided over in a work session, I believe, and the gentleman came and he gave us a really cool presentation. There were bar graphs and just a ton of information. And they talked about, this was, I think, in March or April when we didn't really, know what we were going into. But they talked about the possibility of, if things got to a crippling point, you could take out loans and do all of this stuff. Have you considered that? I mean, just because I don't know, they've said we're 7 million short. That's been the rumor. I don't know the exact number. If we're $7 million short and saying that cuts would have to come from somewhere, but there's a possibility that, things could turn around based on how quickly we get this vaccine and stuff out. Would short-term answer just be to take out the loan of $7 million to cover us and work it out over the long term? Or what? I don't know if I'm even out of line in answering this question. I'm sorry. I
will say what Classy Hoyle said one time, which I think is very germane here. You can't borrow your way out of debt. And, you just don't want to keep piling the problems higher and higher. Jody, you were going to say something, and David had his hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if the city manager wants to interject here or not. I would just say that anything you borrow, you have to pay back. And when you borrow to cover operating expenses, it's like borrowing money to pay for your groceries. It's something you continually have to pay. And so when you borrow for it, you're just amplifying your problem. So it would not be my desire to borrow the funds. The only time I would do that is if we had some kind of cash issue where we were short on cash, but we had the revenues coming in later. That would not be how I would handle it. I would either reduce the current expenses. And we also have reserves. You have budget stabilization fund monies. You have, we have our 15% general fund reserve, which I hope we don't have to tap into. That's the big reserve that the rating agencies look at, is that 15% reserve. But we do have budget stabilization. We have a capital reserve fund, which is for capital purposes. I don't know how that could be repurposed. Right now, there's no language to show what you would do with that money if you weren't going to use it for capital purposes. And we have our one-time reserve as well, that what we can apply to things. So that's an answer as well. But with all that, because of the lack of revenue growth over the past 2 years, we're almost flat for the 2 years. And all the growth in our personnel expenses, pension and salaries, we are going to have to find some savings there this year. It's the reserves. I wouldn't suggest using your reserves to fill the whole thing. I would suggest you try to find as many compensation savings as you can. And then if you want to use reserves or increase taxes or whatever else your resources are, you would take those actions lastly.
And what we found in the 2009 experience is when you use your reserves, you introduce cash flow problems. And we had to take out two $10 million lines of credit because we didn't have the reserves there to pay both salaries and also vendors. David, you had wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, Jody covered most of it, but I think to go back to Alderman Gay's question about the Council Compensation Commission, they'll make recommendations. They'll set sort of an upper limit on the council and on my salaries, but it's still up to the council to approve that or decide what the appropriate salary is. So, whatever they dictate doesn't necessarily become law right away without the council approval of that.
They're going to double our salary, but defer it for 10 years.
And I might add, they did make recommendations over the years that the council did not agree with and did not approve. So may I ask, Jody, we've been talking a little bit about transportation. At some point, will we have an accounting of how the CARES money for transit are being used? And whether that is helping us with our budget. And I don't want to use the word supplant, but are we able to use those additional revenues coming in for transit so that we're not having to supplement their budget out of the general fund?
Currently, and in the previous recent years, we don't supplement out of the general fund. It's been supplemented from the parking fund, which has in some years gone from parking to the general fund and then to the transportation fund, but it's we've been showing it recently just as a direct transfer from parking to transportation. That said, parking revenues are down and parking is not going to be able to subsidize this year. So for the transit expenses that are being incurred in transportation fund, where we don't have a subsidy, we are using those that CARES grant, which can be used for any transit operating expenses. to fill the gap. And we've just recently, we've hit a little bit of a glitch in that they haven't released all of that $4 million for us to use yet. And so we're working with them to see when we can get the rest of it released.
I just want us to put a pin in this for future discussions when we get to Hillman Garage and City Dock.
Yeah, once we have the final terms of that agreement, how that's going to work out financially, we'll have to look for solutions to either transportation or City Dock construction funding. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some more problems to figure out to solve as we get to that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion or anything for the good of the order or a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Thank you, everyone. All in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Oh.